Michael Scott had fired 15 maids in 2 months, but nothing could have prepared him for what he saw that night. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel normal. He had come home hours earlier than planned, his footsteps echoing across the marble floor of his Texas mansion. Every light was dim, every hallway empty. But when he opened the playroom door, he froze. His paralyzed twin sons, David and Daniel, were standing. Not sitting, not in their wheelchairs, standing. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. His hands shook as he whispered, "What did you do to them?" But the new maid, Sophia, didn't answer. She just knelt on the floor, her arms open, her eyes filled with tears, like she had been waiting for this moment all along. And in that silence, something inside him began to crack open. The mansion was quiet again. The kind of quiet that made even the walls sound heavy. 6 months before that night, before Michael Scott saw his paralyzed sons standing, life inside that house had already stopped moving. The sun barely reached through the tall glass windows. The air smelled like medicine and dust. Expensive art hung on the walls, but nothing inside felt alive. Every sound echoed too long, every clock ticked too loud. The rooms looked perfect, but they felt empty, like no one really lived there. Michael used to walk those halls with pride. Now he only walked to remember what he had lost. His wife, Emily, had died in a boating accident on the lake behind their Texas estate. That day had taken everything from him. His sons, David and Daniel, were pulled from the wreck alive, but the doctor's words had burned into his mind forever. They may never walk again. He had money, power, and doctors from around the world, but nothing changed. The twins were trapped in small wheelchairs that seemed too big for their tiny bodies. Their laughter was gone. The light in their eyes had faded. Michael's heart grew harder with each passing day. He didn't pray anymore. He didn't believe in anything. 15 maids had worked in that house since the accident. None of them lasted. Some ran out crying after 1 week. Others quit without collecting their pay. The pain inside that house was too strong, too cold. Michael stopped asking why they left. He told himself he didn't need anyone. But even he could not ignore the silence anymore. The twins hardly spoke. Their toys were untouched, their food left cold on the plates. Every corner of the mansion carried memories of a woman who would never come home again. Then one rainy morning, a car stopped at the gate. The butler opened the front door, and a small woman stepped inside, her coat soaked from the storm. She carried only one old suitcase and a folded umbrella that looked broken. Her shoes were muddy, her hair slightly damp, but her face was calm. Her name was Sophia. She didn't look like someone who worked for billionaires. Her clothes were simple, her hands rough from hard work. But when she spoke, her voice was soft, steady, and sure. "Good morning, sir," she said to the butler. "I was sent by the agency." The butler nodded, his tone tired. "Mr. Scott is in his study. You will clean, cook, and help the boys when needed. Follow the schedule. Do not enter the West Wing without permission." Sophia just smiled and said, "Yes, sir." She didn't ask questions. When she walked into the main hall, she stopped for a moment and looked around. The marble floor reflected her small figure. 2 wheelchairs sat near the window, untouched, side by side. The twins were there, staring out toward the rain. They didn't turn when she entered. They didn't even blink. Sophia didn't move closer. She stood quietly for a moment, then said gently, "Good morning, David. Good morning, Daniel." Neither of them answered. The TV was on, but the volume was low, only playing soft children's music that no one was watching. The air felt thick. Sophia didn't mind. She started her work slowly, quietly. She dusted the furniture, wiped the glass, and folded blankets as though each one held a memory. She cleaned the picture frames on the walls, pausing at one that showed Emily holding the twins in her arms. Her eyes softened. "You were beautiful," she whispered under her breath. Upstairs, Michael stood by his office window, watching from a distance. He had seen many maids come and go, but something about this one made him stop. She didn't rush. She didn't speak loudly or complain about the house. She moved like she understood sorrow. But he didn't let the thought stay. He closed the blinds and turned away. That night, Sophia finished her chores late. The house had gone quiet again. The rain still tapped against the windows, slow and steady. She walked past the twins' room and peeked inside. They were both awake, staring at the ceiling in silence. The nurse had already left for the night. Sophia stepped in softly. She sat on the chair between their beds, her voice low but warm. "Do you boys want me to read something?" she asked. David turned his head slightly but said nothing. Daniel just blinked once. Sophia nodded, taking their silence as an answer. She reached into her small bag and pulled out an old children's book. "This was my sister's favorite," she said. "She used to make me read it every night." Her tone was calm, patient, almost like a lullaby. Halfway through, she noticed David's eyes closing. Daniel's fingers were wrapped around his toy giraffe. She smiled, closed the book quietly, and whispered, "Good night, my boys." When she left, she didn't know that Michael had been standing at the door behind her, listening. He hadn't planned to. He was just passing by, but the sound of her voice had stopped him. For a long time, he stood there, staring at the twins. Something about the way they looked at her, even in silence, felt different. Later that night, as he sat alone in his office, he opened a file from yet another doctor. "No change," it read. He closed it without finishing. He leaned back, his face pale in the lamplight, and whispered to himself, "Nothing ever changes." But somewhere down the hall, something already had. Sophia sat in her small room near the laundry area. She folded her clothes neatly, then knelt beside her bed, whispering a quiet prayer. "God, I don't know why you sent me here, but use me however you want, even if no one sees it." Outside her window, the rain finally began to slow. The wind softened, and in the room across the hall, two small boys slept soundly for the first time in months. When the morning came, sunlight touched the curtains gently. The house felt slightly lighter, though no one could explain why. The twins woke up to find their toy car sitting on the rug between their wheelchairs, polished and fixed. They didn't know who had done it, but it made them smile a little. In the kitchen, Sophia was already working, humming softly to herself. Her voice filled the space like a gentle warmth. The butler stopped for a moment, surprised. "You're singing," he said. Sophia smiled. Sometimes, singing helps the day start better. He didn't reply, but he didn't leave either. Upstairs, Michael noticed something unusual. The TV wasn't as loud as usual, and for the first time, he heard something else instead of silence laughter, small and brief, coming from the playroom. He paused, one hand on the doorframe, unsure if it was real. He didn't open the door yet. He just listened. The sound faded, replaced by Sophia's quiet humming. Something deep inside him stirred, but he didn't know what it was. The house that had been filled with sorrow for so long had taken one small breath of peace. And though Michael didn't know it yet, that peace had a name, Sophia. The next morning, the sun rose weakly over the Texas hills, spilling pale light across the wide driveway of the Scott mansion. Inside, everything looked the same, but something had changed. The house didn't feel as heavy as before. For the first time in months, a quiet warmth moved through the halls, like the air itself was trying to breathe again. Sophia was already awake. She had washed her hands, tied her hair neatly, and stood in front of the mirror whispering a small prayer. "God, let me be useful today," she said softly. She didn't pray for miracles. She only asked for strength to keep going, even if no one noticed. In the kitchen, she began preparing breakfast. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. The butler walked in, still half asleep, and paused at the scent. He hadn't smelled home-cooked food in that kitchen since Emily's death. He said nothing, only nodded and poured himself coffee. Sophia smiled. "The boys like their eggs soft, right?" she asked gently. He looked at her, surprised she even knew. "Yes," he said quietly, "but they rarely eat." Sophia nodded, her hands still busy at the stove. Maybe today will be different. Upstairs, the twins were awake, their nurse fixing their clothes and arranging their wheelchairs. David stared at the ceiling, his small hands folded tightly in his lap. Daniel sat quietly beside him, holding his giraffe. Neither spoke a word. The nurse sighed and pushed their chairs toward the elevator. When they reached the dining room, Sophia was already setting the table. She looked up and smiled softly. "Good morning, my little men." The nurse stepped aside, uncomfortable, unsure if she should let this woman talk to them like that. But Sophia didn't care about rules or stares. She bent down to their level. "I made your favorite," she said, pointing at the plates. "Eggs, toast, and a little orange juice." David's eyes shifted toward her, then back to his plate. Daniel looked at his brother, waiting. Sophia didn't push. She took a seat nearby and began eating quietly herself. "You know," she said softly, "when I was little, my sister and I used to play a game at breakfast. Whoever finished their toast first got to say what they were thankful for." The boys didn't answer, but after a moment, David picked up his fork, slow and unsure. Daniel followed, breaking a small piece of toast. The nurse stood frozen, watching. They hadn't done that in months. Sophia smiled but said nothing more. She ate quietly with them, like it was the most normal thing in the world. By the time breakfast ended, both plates were half empty. Later that day, Michael stepped out of his office, hearing soft laughter. He frowned at first, confused. He hadn't heard that sound since before the accident. He followed it down the hallway until he reached the playroom. The door was open just a little. Inside, Sophia was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by coloring books and crayons. The twins were beside her, watching her draw something on a piece of paper. She wasn't talking loudly, just speaking gently, her voice smooth and patient. She held up the drawing. It was two stick-figure boys holding hands under a crooked sun. At the bottom, she had written, "You are strong." David smiled, small, but real. Daniel whispered something too quiet to hear. Sophia placed the drawing between them, her voice barely above a whisper. "See? Even when we don't move fast, we can still grow stronger inside." Michael stood at the door without making a sound. He didn't want to interrupt. For the first time in a long while, his sons didn't look broken. They looked alive. That night, the nurse came to him, still shaken. "Sir," she said quietly. "The boys smiled today." Michael looked up from his files. "Smiled?" "Yes," she said, at her drawing. "I've never seen them react like that." He didn't reply. But later that night, when the house went still, he checked the security footage from the hallway camera. The screen flickered softly, showing Sophia on the floor with his sons, crayons scattered, her face peaceful. She wasn't forcing them to do anything, she was just there. He leaned closer, eyes fixed on the small moment frozen on screen. "Who are you?" he whispered to himself. The next morning, Michael came down earlier than usual. He found Sophia folding laundry in the sitting room, humming softly to herself. The tune was calm and familiar, like something his wife used to hum long ago. "You're up early, sir," she said politely, not looking startled. He nodded. "You sing in the morning?" Sophia smiled slightly. "It helps me remember that the day isn't over yet, no matter how it starts." He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and walked away. But her words stayed with him. A few hours later, the twins were in their play area again. Sophia had placed 2 stuffed animals on the floor. "Let's see who can reach it first," she said. David frowned. "We can't move that fast," he said softly. Sophia tilted her head. "Who told you that?" Daniel looked at his brother, then at Sophia. She smiled and nodded encouragingly. "Try, baby, just try." Daniel reached for his wheelchair rims, pushing gently. The sound of the wheels rolled softly over the floor. David followed, his small arms trembling, but he didn't stop. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement. Sophia clapped her hands quietly, her face glowing. "That's it. That's my brave boys." The nurse, who had been standing nearby, covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. From upstairs, Michael heard the sound of laughter again. He left his office without thinking, his steps quick, his heart unsure. When he reached the railing, he stopped and looked down. The twins were moving across the playroom, slow but determined, while Sophia knelt between them, cheering them on. He stood there a long time, just watching. That night, something in him began to change. He sat at the dinner table for the first time in weeks. Sophia served quietly, the twins beside her, eating without being told. The scene looked almost normal, but to Michael it felt sacred. He looked at Sophia, her calm expression, her gentle way of speaking to the boys. Every part of her carried peace, something this house hadn't seen in a long time. After dinner, as the twins went to bed, he stood in the hallway watching her tuck them in. She whispered, "Good night, my angels." Daniel turned and said softly, "Good night, Sophia." Michael felt his throat tighten. He stepped back before she could see him, his hand resting against the wall. When he reached his office, he sat in silence for a long time. Then, for the first time since Emily's death, he whispered, "Thank you." The house, once filled with sorrow, was starting to remember what love felt like, but neither Michael nor Sophia knew that something even greater and more painful was still ahead. The mansion had begun to breathe again, but old wounds were not done speaking. And before peace could stay, the past would have to be faced. The days passed quietly in the Scott mansion, but inside that quiet, something new had begun to grow. The twins, David and Daniel, started smiling more often. They laughed at breakfast, argued softly over toys, and sometimes asked Sophia to sing the same song twice. The sound of their laughter filled the once empty rooms, and for Michael, that sound became something he waited to hear each morning, though he never admitted it out loud. Sophia worked gently, never rushing. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words had weight. Her calmness made everyone else slow down too. Even the butler, who used to move like a ghost through the hallways, found himself talking again. He would pause near the kitchen, watching her hum as she worked, and whisper quietly, "That woman brought life back into this house." But Sophia never took credit. Every night before she slept, she knelt by her bed, whispering the same prayer. "Lord, if this is where you need me, help me stay, and if I'm only meant to pass through, let me leave a little light behind." One evening, as the sun faded behind the hills of Texas, Michael walked past the sitting room. He saw Sophia there, reading to the twins. She sat between them on the couch, the storybook open on her lap. Daniel leaned against her arm. David giggled softly when she changed her voice to sound like the story's lion. Michael leaned on the doorway, saying nothing. He didn't want to break the moment. But something stirred in him, something both painful and gentle. It reminded him of Emily, the way she used to sit with the boys before bed, reading until they fell asleep. For a second, the ache of loss returned like a wave, but this time, it didn't drown him. It only made him breathe slower. That night, when the house grew silent again, Michael sat alone in his office. Papers were scattered across his desk, but he wasn't reading any of them. His eyes drifted to the family photo on the wall. Emily smiling with the twins in her arms. He whispered softly, "They're getting better, Em. I wish you could see them." His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was his advisor, John Reed. "Michael," John said, "we need to talk about the boys' care. I've been reviewing the reports." "What about them?" Michael asked tiredly. "They're improving, yes, but we should be realistic. If you want long-term results, you'll need to hire certified therapists to live in-house. We can't rely on, well, just emotional support. She's doing fine, but she's not trained for this." Michael's tone sharpened. "Her name is Sophia." "Yes, of course," John said quickly. "She's made progress, but we both know it's not enough. Hope is good, but you need professionals. Someone qualified." Michael didn't answer. He stared at the photo of his wife again, his chest tight. "We'll talk later," he said finally, and hung up. He didn't realize Sophia had been walking down the hallway outside his office when she heard part of the conversation. She froze near the half-open door. "She's made progress, but she's not trained." The words hit harder than she expected. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, her Bible open, the small silver locket warm in her hand. Inside it were two pictures, her late sister Olivia, and an old hospital wristband. She traced it with her finger and whispered, "I tried my best, Liv. Maybe this is where it ends." The next morning, she moved slower than usual. She still smiled, still worked, but something in her had grown distant. The twins noticed first. At breakfast, David looked at her and asked, "Sophia, are you okay?" She smiled faintly. "Of course, baby, eat your eggs." But her voice didn't sound the same. Later that day, Michael noticed too. She passed him in the hallway, and he stopped. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Sophia nodded. "Yes, sir." He wanted to say more, to ask what was wrong, but he didn't, and maybe that silence hurt her more than any words could have. That evening, as she tucked the twins into bed, they didn't smile like before. Daniel clutched his giraffe tightly and whispered, "You're not leaving, right?" Sophia froze. "Why would you think that?" "I heard Daddy talking," David said softly. "He said someone else might help us. Someone trained." Sophia felt her throat tighten. She sat between their beds, her voice trembling. "Sometimes grown-ups say things when they're worried, but that doesn't mean I want to go." "Then don't," Daniel whispered. "Please don't." She leaned over, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "Sleep, my loves." But as she walked out, her eyes filled with tears. In the hallway, Michael was waiting. His voice was low. "They think you're leaving." Sophia nodded slowly, still facing away. "They're not wrong." He stepped closer. "I didn't mean for you to hear what I said to John." "But I did," she replied, "and you didn't correct him." Michael lowered his gaze. "I was only trying to plan what's best for them." Sophia turned to face him, her eyes tired but steady. "Do you think I don't want what's best for them? You think I stayed here for comfort? I stayed because I saw something in them when everyone else gave up." He tried to speak, but she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "But they saw something in me too. For the first time since my sister died, I felt like I was where I was meant to be." Michael took a slow breath. "You've done more than I ever expected. I don't want to fail them again." She gave a sad smile. "Maybe you already haven't. Maybe you just can't see it yet." She turned to walk away, stopping only once at the stairs. "You have no idea how much love this house needed. Don't throw it away just because it doesn't come with a certificate." That night, she packed her Bible and journal into her small bag. She didn't plan to leave, but she needed to be ready, in case someone else decided for her. The house felt cold again. Even the air carried tension. The next morning, the twins barely spoke. They didn't touch their breakfast. They only stared at the doorway, waiting to see if she'd walk through it. Upstairs, Michael sat on his bed, holding a photo of his wife and children. He whispered, "Emily, what am I doing?" His voice cracked, quiet and lonely. Down the hall, Sophia stood by her room door, holding her bag. She looked down at her hands and whispered, "God, if this is the end, give me peace. And if there's more, don't let me walk away too soon." The house was still. Then a soft sound broke the silence. A shuffle. Sophia turned. At the end of the hallway, two small figures were moving slowly, David and Daniel. Their wheelchairs were empty. They were walking, one step at a time, holding on to each other's arms for balance. Her bag dropped to the floor. The boys kept coming, trembling, eyes bright with tears. "Sophia!" Daniel said, his voice shaking. "We did it!" Sophia ran to them, fell to her knees, and wrapped them in her arms, crying freely. "Oh, my babies," she whispered, "you did it." Behind her, another sound echoed, slow footsteps from the staircase. Michael stood there, frozen. His sons were standing. His heart felt like it stopped. "What did you do to them?" he whispered, voice breaking. Sophia turned to him, tears still falling. "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "They did. Dies vran be. I dies vran be." Michael couldn't move. His hands trembled as he stared at his sons, their legs shaking but still holding, their faces full of light he hadn't seen in so long. The hallway that once held silence now held breath, warmth, and something he had stopped believing in, hope. He stepped closer, his voice unsteady. "David, Daniel, how?" David smiled, weak but proud. "Sophia told us to try." Michael turned to her, still kneeling with tears in her eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them stood still. Then, slowly, Michael's knees gave way, and he knelt beside his sons, his eyes wet, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I thought I lost you both." Daniel placed his small hand on his father's shoulder. "You didn't lose us, Daddy. We were just waiting." Sophia stood quietly, wiping her tears. She didn't want to take this moment from them. This was their healing, their miracle. But Michael looked up at her and shook his head gently. "No, Sophia, you did this. You brought them back." She shook her head softly. "I didn't fix them, sir. I just stayed when no one else would." For the first time in years, Michael reached out and took her hand. It wasn't a gesture of command or control. It was gratitude, deep and wordless. "Then thank you," he said quietly, "for staying when I didn't even know I needed someone to." That night, the mansion didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive. The twins sat together on the couch, holding their stuffed animals. Sophia helped them stretch their legs carefully, guiding them with patience, smiling each time they managed to move an inch further. Michael sat nearby, just watching. The sound of his son's laughter filled the air again. The ache in his chest softened. For months, he had buried himself under guilt and work. But now, looking at them, he realized something he had forgotten. Grief doesn't die when ignored. It heals when love returns. Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Sophia sat by the window in her small room. The silver locket rested against her chest. She opened it and stared at her sister's picture, whispering, "You'd be proud, Liv. They're walking now. They're smiling again." A tear slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was peace. Outside her door, Michael stood quietly, watching her silhouette through the dim light. He didn't knock, he just listened to her prayer. "Thank you, God," she said softly. "You let me stay long enough to see what faith can do." The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows, flooding every room with brightness. The smell of pancakes and warm syrup filled the air. Sophia was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes, humming the same gentle tune she sang every morning. Michael walked in, still wearing his robe. "You've been up early," he said, his tone softer than usual. Sophia smiled without turning. "I couldn't sleep. It's a beautiful morning." He walked closer, leaning against the counter. "The boys told me you promised them a pancake race." Sophia laughed quietly. "Yes. Whoever finishes first gets to choose the next song I sing." He smiled. It felt strange on his face, but good. "Can I join?" She looked at him, surprised. "You?" He nodded, pretending to be serious. "I think I can beat them." A small laugh escaped her. "We'll see, sir." They moved to the dining table, where David and Daniel were already seated. Their braces glimmered in the sunlight as they balanced carefully in their chairs. When they saw their father, they smiled wide. "Daddy's joining," David said. Sophia served the plates, each stack perfect and golden. Michael lifted his fork and nodded. "Ready." "Ready," the twins said together, giggling. Sophia clapped once. "Go." For a few minutes, laughter filled the dining room, louder than it had been in years. Michael pretended to cheat, the twins called him out, and Sophia laughed until tears rolled down her face. There were no nurses, no reports, no sadness, only family. After breakfast, Michael walked Sophia to the sunroom. The air smelled like fresh flowers. The twins' wheelchairs were still there, but untouched. They sat nearby, playing with toy cars on the rug. Michael turned to her, his eyes calm but full. "You know," he said slowly, "when Emily died, I stopped praying. I stopped believing anyone up there was listening. But since you came, something changed." Sophia looked down, her voice soft. "He was listening, sir. You just couldn't hear him through the pain." He nodded. "Maybe so. But now, I see what I couldn't before. You didn't just help them walk again, you helped me stand again too." She smiled gently. "That wasn't me, sir. That was love. It never left this house. It was just waiting for someone to open the door again." He took a slow breath. "Then don't leave. Not as staff. Not as someone passing through. Stay, Sophia. Stay as part of our family." Her eyes filled, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I'm sure," he said, "because I don't think God sent you here to clean my house. I think He sent you here to heal it." That afternoon, Sophia joined the twins in the garden. The sun was warm, the wind gentle. Daniel tried walking across the soft grass while David held his hand for balance. Sophia stayed close, cheering them quietly. Michael stood near the porch, watching with his hands in his pockets, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The twins reached her, panting and laughing. Daniel looked up. "Sophia, we're walking faster now." She knelt beside them, smiling. "Yes, baby, you are," David added. "When we fall, we just try again, like you said." She nodded. "That's what brave people do." Michael stepped closer, his eyes soft. "Brave," he repeated quietly. "That's what you've made us all." As the sun dipped behind the hills, the four of them sat together on the porch. The sky glowed orange and pink. For the first time, it felt like home again. Michael's hand rested gently on Sophia's, no words between them, only quiet understanding. Later that night, after the twins had gone to bed, Michael stood by the window with Sophia beside him. "I've decided to start a foundation," he said quietly. "For children like David and Daniel. I'll name it after Emily." Sophia smiled. She'd be proud. He looked at her, eyes full. "And I'll need someone to help me run it." "Me?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "No one understands healing better than you." She looked down, tears slipping free. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he whispered. "I will," she said. The house that had once been filled with grief now overflowed with life. Laughter echoed through the halls again. The mansion no longer felt cold. It had found its heart. That night, Sophia sat by the window in her room, holding her locket, smiling at the stars above Texas. "We made it, Liv," she whispered. "We really made it." Down the hall, Michael peeked into his son's room. They were fast asleep, holding hands, their braces beside the bed. He turned off the light, looked toward Sophia's door, and whispered, "Thank you." The world outside was quiet, but inside that home, something sacred had come alive again: love, faith, and the quiet miracle of trying one more time. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that real miracles don't always come with light or thunder. Sometimes, they come through quiet hearts who refuse to give up. Tell us where you are watching from, and what you learned from this story. If this story touched you, like, subscribe, and share it so others can feel the same. And if you want more emotional stories like this, comment "more stories" and you'll be the first to see the next one. Now tell us in the comments. 1. What did you feel when the twins finally stood up? 2. Do you believe Sophia was sent by God? 3. What lesson did this story teach you about love and faith?